Hello everyone and welcome back to the annual Profits of Profits auction. Today we have our first and only item, this man holding a plate of bread. Bidding will start at $20.
I'll give you $50.
Okay, we got $50, we got $50. Any more bidders? Do we have any more bidders? Going once, going twice. Sold to the man in the American hat for $50.
Woo! Just got that bad boy for way under its intrinsic value, baby. Let's go!
Do you even know what intrinsic value means?
Uh-huh.
The intrinsic value is the measure of what a stock is truly worth based on some sort of fundamental analysis or intrinsic value calculation. Now, first of all, we will be diving into some important ratios when analyzing a company's intrinsic value. First of all, we have the price to earnings, or the PE ratio, which is the company's stock price divided by the company's earnings per share. And the reason this ratio is important is because it allows us to evaluate whether the company is overvalued or cheap relative to its earnings. Next, we have the price to earnings to growth, or the PEG ratio. And this is the company's PE ratio, as calculated up here, divided by the company's percent EPS growth rate. And this ratio is important because it tells us that although a company may be overvalued according to its price to earnings ratio, the company's high growth rate may be able to justify that ratio. And lastly, we have the price to book ratio, or the PB ratio, which is the stock price of the company divided by the company's book value per share. And book value is just calculated by total assets minus total liabilities. So, an ideal PE ratio is simply less than the average of the industry that the company is in. The PEG ratio ideally should be less than 1, and the PB ratio ideally should be less than 2.
So our next three important ratios are the debt to equity ratio, return on equity, and dividend yield. Debt to equity, or DE ratio, is your total liabilities above your total shareholder equity. Now this allows us to determine how reliant a company is on loans compared to shareholder funding. And this ideally is below 2, and this tells us that a company operates more on shareholder funding rather than loans. Next is return on equity, or ROE, which is your net income divided by total shareholder equity. And this allows us to determine how effective a company is at making money using shareholder funding. And ideally you want this number to be above 20%, and this proves that they are highly efficient at making money with shareholder funding. Next is dividend yield, which is your dividends per share over stock price. Now, a dividend is a distribution of extra profits to shareholders, and your dividend yield is how good a company's dividends are compared to its stock price. And ideally, you want this number to be above 2%.
Now, our first way to calculate intrinsic value is through discounted cash flow analysis. And the whole philosophy behind this is that money given to you right now is greater in value than money given to you later. Now, let me give you an example. First of all, let's say you gave your friend $100. So in the first example, he pays you back right away. And then theoretically, you could put that money into a bond with a 5% interest rate. And in the future, in 1 year, you'll have $105 and have made $5 profit. On the other hand, your friend could be a leech that says, bro, I'll pay you back in 1 year. And in 1 year, you'll have $100 instead of what you would have had if he paid it back to you right away, which would have been $105. So essentially, the way discounted cash flow analysis calculates the intrinsic value is by taking all of the company's future cash flows and reducing it to its current value, which would then give you the intrinsic value. Now, how you calculate DCF, discounted cash flow, is this formula right here, which is sigma CF divided by 1 plus R to the n. Now, this is just a bunch of letters right now, but let me explain. First of all, this value, sigma CF, is a sum of all future free cash flows estimated by some sort of free cash flow growth rate. Next, we have R, which could be multiple different things. It could be the current discount rates, it could be the current interest rates, or it could be the S&P 500 expected returns. And lastly, we have N, which is just the number of years you're going out to, which is typically around 5 to 10 years. And the intrinsic value of one share of the stock is calculated by DCF, calculated as here, divided by the total shares of the company. Now, there are multiple ways that someone can calculate the free cash flow growth rate of a company. However, one common way people do it is using a compound annual growth rate based on previous cash flows. So this formula is the final free cash flow divided by the initial free cash flow to the power of 1 over n minus 1. And the number n here is simply the difference in years between the final free cash flow you're looking at and the first free cash flow you're looking at.
Another way of calculating intrinsic value is through the Benjamin Graham formula, which takes the square root of 22.5 times the price to earning ratio times the book value per share. Now, the 22.5 comes from the ideal price per earning ratio times the ideal book value per share, which is 15 times 1.5. And this is just an easier and faster way to calculate intrinsic value, so you can kind of use whichever one you want. And finally, we have the margin of safety, which is an evaluation of the safety and possible profitability of an investment. Now, to calculate this, you take your intrinsic value as calculated with one of the formulas as previously stated, minus your current value of the stock over your intrinsic value, which will give you a percentage value. Now, you take this value, and if it is greater than 20%, then that means it is more likely to move up and make profit rather than go down, and it is more safe investment overall. In this video, we went over intrinsic values and how to calculate the intrinsic value of a company's stock. We went over important ratios that help us gauge certain components of a company that may affect its intrinsic value.
And then we went over 2 different ways to calculate the intrinsic value of a company. The first one being discounted cash flow analysis, which is much more precise but also a lot more complicated. And then we have Benjamin Graham's formula, which is less precise but a lot easier.
We finally went over the margin of safety and how to calculate it, which helps us determine how safe and possibly profitable an investment into a company can be. Profit to profit out!